Hello and good evening. I'm Melisa Idris. Welcome to Consider This. This is the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. Malaysia now has an acting Chief Justice. Sri Hasnah Mohammed Hashim, the Chief Judge of Malaya and currently the highest ranked judge in the judiciary, will temporarily carry out the duties of the Chief Justice until a new appointment is made. The transition, however, has been anything but smooth. For the first time in Malaysia's legal history, the top two posts of the judiciary fell vacant simultaneously and without prior announcement or any clarity on succession. At a time when public confidence in institutions is fragile, what will it take to ensure that the judiciary remains credible, independent and sacrosanct? Joining me on the show to discuss this further is Datuk Ambiga Sreenevasan, who is the President of the Malaysian Bar. She was the President of the Malaysian Bar from 2007 to 2009, and she's also the former Chairperson of Bersih. Ambiga, thank you so much for being with us on the show today. So we have an acting Chief Justice in place now. In your view, does that resolve all the concerns that were once had about a leadership vacuum?
Thank you. First of all, nice to see you again, Melisa. Thank you for having me on your show. Well, is there clarity? I don't think so. And perhaps I can answer it this way. The current acting Chief Justice, Justice Sri Hasnah, and Justice Zabaria, who is acting PCA, President Court of Appeal, both of them are currently on their 6 months extension. So effectively, Justice Sri Hasnah will retire on the 14th of November 2025, and Justice Zabaria will retire on the 10th of October 2025. So in fact, if Tun Maimun had been given the 6 months extension, she would have been here for longer than that. And similarly with, of course, Tan Sri Abang Iskandar. So that's one of the reasons I don't understand what the plan is. You mentioned succession plan. I agree with you. I think we don't know what the succession plan is. And if they didn't have a succession plan, why the unholy rush to not extend the 3 top judges? And I think really we need an explanation why that happened, when in fact the simplest solution would have been to extend them. Then we would have been looked after for a few more months, as it were. So I also want to point out this, which is that in mature jurisdictions, what happens is Monday an office bearer retires, Tuesday the new office bearer takes over. They never allow a gap. It has happened in Malaysia before, I'm not saying no, but it shouldn't. And all it takes, and that's why we have a JAC and a process, etc. The process is clear. All it takes is a little planning ahead of time. So if you ask me whether this has solved the problem, well, very temporarily perhaps. It is still very difficult for one person to hold these 2 onerous offices, as now Tan Sri Hasnah has to do, Justice Tan Sri Hasnah. And I think that is something that ought to have been avoided and could have easily been avoided. So why this? And what exactly is the plan? Actually, I'd like to know what the plan is. What was the Prime Minister thinking? When he was so stubbornly refused to extend these judges by the 6 months, that we suggested. You see, if they were incompetent or in any way not doing their jobs, that's a different matter. But by all accounts, the top 3 judges in this country were, at that time, before they retired, 2 of them retired, the best. They did their jobs impeccably. They had scholarship in their judgments. They wrote several judgments. So there was no complaint. And in fact, they showed tremendous courage in the way they carried out their duty. So what is the reason? If the reason is because they are independent, then we really have a problem with the Prime Minister not extending their 6 months. So when you don't answer these questions, you create a lot of suspicion as to what the reasons are. The best is to come clean and have some clarity about that.
Okay.
So yes. So you asked me the question.
Can I just get you to elaborate on that? When you say that we deserve an explanation as to what happened in the entire transition, in the way this leadership transition was managed or was not managed, or whether there was a plan or not, what stood out to you the most? What were you most concerned about, and what were these questions that you had lingering in your mind?
Well, this is the top level of the judiciary we're talking about. We're talking about the Chief Justice, who has actually lifted the profile of the judiciary internationally. She's well respected. So it didn't make sense to me. When something doesn't make sense, something is wrong. And you see, it is not just a question of the 6 months, quite apart from the question of the 6 months. It was how they were treated. Were you aware that to the last day, they didn't even get a letter to say that they were not being extended? I don't think they even got a letter of thanks. I don't know about that. But that's how you treat the top judicial officers in the country. That's appalling. How dare you come out and say you believe in the independence of the judiciary when you can't even, treat them with the respect that they deserve. So quite apart from the 6 months is the treatment they received. And these are judges who did their jobs. Okay, they did their duty by the people, by the nation. So what is it? And that's why I say we deserve an explanation. We really do deserve an explanation.
Ambiga, there's been a lot of conversation, discussion around Tun Tengku Maimun's legacy. But from within the bar, how do you view her legacy, not just through her judgments, but through the way she embodied judicial courage and judicial leadership? Could you share any thoughts you have on her legacy?
Oh yeah, I think her legacy, really is remarkable. Number one, being the first woman Chief Justice. Okay, let's not forget that. She shattered every glass ceiling there is to shatter. And she's done women proud, let me tell you, for the way she has conducted herself, the courage that she showed. She's tiny, but wow, isn't she full of steel? Okay, I think everybody would agree with me. And she was very thoughtful in her judgments. She was very thoughtful, and she wrote all her judgments, and you read them. You see, this is why I say judges are the easiest to assess, because they write judgments. So all those who are criticizing her, please go and read her judgments first before you talk about her. Read all their judgments. All these 3 judges who were not extended, read their judgments and tell me they are not deserving of an extension. And then explain to me why, because I have read their judgments. So all of those who talk without reading their judgments are, to me, don't deserve to criticize her in any way. So let me tell you what Chief Justice Sundaresan, the Honorable Sundaresan Menon, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Singapore, had to say about her. So here I'm talking about people outside the jurisdiction, jurists, eminent jurists, who this is what he said about her. He said, what stands out prominently from her jurisprudence is her courage, the strength of character, and the deep conviction to uphold the rule of law, to safeguard judicial independence, and simply to do right to all manner of people. She is in many ways the perfect embodiment of what it means to discharge one's judicial mission faithfully and courageously, and she has done this with consummate grace and dignity. Now, what an accolade. What an accolade. And you could the 2 other judges, the president, former president of Court of Appeal, and Justice Nalini, that's Tan Sri Abang Iskandar, and Justice Nalini, all carried the same weight. They were as dedicated to the rule of law as was Tunku Maimun. Of course, Tunku Maimun had the additional job of leading. She had the additional job of leading the judiciary. And if you read her speeches that she gave, for example, at the opening of the legal year, her advice to her judges was crystal clear. You follow the law. You follow the law. She didn't say you have to, and she says, forget about politics, forget about everything else. You just go on the law. So her advice was so sound to her judges, whom she also defended whenever they needed defending. She was a wonderful example of a leader, and we're very proud of her, actually. I will tell you that. From the bar, that's why everyone from the bar was very upset by what has occurred.
Can I ask you about that, about comments or statements from the bar in asking for, calling for the extension of her, and not just her, but also the other two judges, of their contracts. Now, if I understand correctly, the Prime Minister had described those calls to extend the tenures as a politicization of the judicial appointments process. And I'm wondering whether or not there's still space for within the legal fraternity or within the judiciary to speak up or to speak openly about judicial reform and appointments. And I say this, I ask you, given that you had led the bar during that walk for justice in 2007, which led to the reform process and the JAC. How would you describe the current space within the legal fraternity to be able to speak up and voice out concerns?
Well, let me remind the Prime Minister, we are not politicians. We are lawyers. If anyone knows the worth of a judge, it's the lawyers. And the bar has a duty, a statutory duty, to speak up in defense of the rule of law. That's all we are doing. We're not in politics. We're not running election. We are not running for office, okay? So what do you mean politicization? It's not. If we see something wrong, we have a duty to speak up, as did this Prime Minister when it came to the VK Lingam cases. In fact, the Chief Justice had actually made reference to that. And let me just read what she said. And it's very interesting if you look at the her remarks in the opening of the legal year, the things that she said. So she says, and I quote her, okay, most of all, I find relevant the views of the then recently appointed leader of the opposition and current Prime Minister of Malaysia, Datuk Sri Anwar Ibrahim, who expressed strong views on the VK Lingam incident. Datuk Sri Anwar Ibrahim concluded then that the JAC Act, in his view, was not enough to restore the independence of the judiciary. He went on to observe that there is a perception that persons who had decided in favor of the government were promoted. So it is not like the Prime Minister doesn't understand the concept of the independence of the judiciary. He spoke loudly and clearly and courageously at that time to defend the independence of the judiciary, which is why, sorry, talking politics just for 30 seconds, which is why I am really surprised at the manner in which he has handled this situation, because of his stand always that the independence of the judiciary was key.
I hadn't listened to that speech she made, that Tunku Maimun made at the beginning of the legal year in full. So thank you for giving us some context to that. But if we were just to stay on the issue of Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim and his current administration, earlier this year, also in January, you had put out a joint statement along with 8 other former presidents of the Malaysian Bar. And if I quote you, you said in that statement, the pressures put on the judiciary in the last several years by external forces were clear to many of us who know the science only too well. And I was hoping you could elaborate on that. What did you mean by pressures on the judiciary? What did you mean by external forces? And what did you mean by the signs that you recognize?
Right. So the pressures, if you recall, through the Najib cases, etc., You will remember Justice Nazlan, again, a very respected judge who did his job. I mean, if only people would read his judgment, you will appreciate his caliber. And he did his job, and he wrote his judgment, but he was personally attacked so viciously by people out there, by politicians and so on. So the CJ was also attacked. People were personal about her. When it came to religious issues, she was also attacked, and that was constant, actually. And in fact, she does say that also in her speech. She says, as Chief Justice, I have been criticized, vilified, been labeled un-Islamic or an enemy of Islam. My husband, unfairly so, has been used against me in some applications to not only have me recused, but more generally to embarrass me and my colleagues. None of them have or ever will pass the test of my conscience. And praise be to Allah, I have not once lost sleep over these comments. Yes, you want courage? That's courage. Okay, so there you are. So they faced so much in their term, when in fact the previous three governments, which is the I will call it Tun Mahathir 2.0, right? And then after that, of course, Tan Sri Muhyiddin and Ismail Sabri, they left the judges alone to decide all these cases. They didn't intervene. So that's what I mean by that. Really, the interference that we're seeing now, and I'm saying this as a perception, because ultimately it's the perception that matters. Because you must have the perception that the judiciary is above board, that they cannot be interfered with, and perception is key. So there is a perception now that there is all this strange happenings going on, and that there is a reason for it. And when I say we know the signs, I lived through the 88 crisis, okay? We fought so hard. It took 30 years for us to come to this point where under Tunku Maimun, the judiciary has really risen to one of its highest levels for a long time and is so well respected. And that's because of their courage and honesty, their integrity, and their scholarship. So having done all that, that's why I'm so passionate about this, Melisa. That's why I can see this going very, very wrong, because the signs are there.
Right. On the issue of perception, I agree with you. There is a justice not only needs to be done, but needs to be seen to be done. And when you talk about the perception of the public towards the judiciary, I think there's also been some concerns raised around the fact that the Prime Minister has a formal role in the judicial appointments process, but also he has been named defendant in an ongoing civil suit. He's currently has, you know, a case in court. Does that raise legitimate concerns around public perception, around propriety, around institutional safeguards, you think, Ambiga?
Yeah, I think there is a problem. I'm not sure what the solution is, because he also has constitutional duties to carry out. But he has to be careful, because he also is, you know, he's been sued in court. So, which is why it is our recommendation, actually, that the role of the Prime Minister should be minimized, if not removed. And quite frankly, when we were talking about the JEC Act, Tun Badawi, may he rest in peace, that gentleman, he actually had discussions with us. He is the one who brought this. In fact, he did a lot of good things, if you recall, like the police commission, etc. But he was keen to get this going because of what happened with the Lingam cases and so on. And he made it happen. He made it happen. And we did try to persuade him that the Prime Minister's role should be removed, that the JAC should be an independent body. But we couldn't persuade him to do that. And I don't think we can persuade any Prime Minister in this country to do that, because they just don't want to give up power, although it is actually for the good of the country. So either their role must be minimized or it should be removed, because, and that's, I'm not saying that it's not personal, it's any Prime Minister. And in the UK, for example, the chair of their similar commission is a layperson. You see? Yes, so there are different models, actually. So this is my personal view, all right, that in fact we should be going that way. Because currently, under the JAC Act, he also is the one who decides on the eminent persons who are appointed. So he has such a big role, even in the composition of the JAC. To me, it's a wholly expanded role. So for a start, that can be contained, because it's a legislation that can be contained. So I think it's a difficult question, this whole thing about conflict, only because he has some constitutional duties there. But the answer is to actually remove them. But no prime minister will give up their powers that easily.
Well, you know, I also think that at the end of the day, whether or not the Malaysian public cares or fully understands about the importance of the judicial appointments process, about judicial independence and how it protects our rights and freedoms in daily life, what would you say, Ambiga, that what would a judiciary that commands the full confidence of the Malaysian public, what would that look like in terms of conduct, in terms of appointments, in terms of accountability even?
I mean, I can point to so many previous Chief Justices, and of course now we've seen Tuku Maimun. How it would look is actually, first of all, the appointment process must make sense. Now, it's not the JAC has actually functioned pretty well. When there's no drama, when there's no interference, they've actually carried out their job, because what they do is they study every candidate. It's tough, you know. Those who want to become judges, they've got to go through a process, and they look at their background, they study everything before they make a recommendation. So it's a huge process that they do carry out, very useful process, which in the old days they didn't. It was just the Chief Justice and the Prime Minister having a discussion kind of situation. So it would look like this. There would be an excellent Judicial Appointments Commission that is wholly independent of the executive. You see, the whole point about independence of the judiciary is independence from the executive, that they cannot have a say, because then that immediately undermines the independence of the judiciary, for the very reason that many government cases go before the courts. Right? And just you've said just now, Prime Minister has a case before the court. And the judiciary must have the freedom and the independence to decide according to the law, whoever the party is. And this the judges under this Chief Justice have been doing that. And you know, you wanted to know about her legacy. I can tell you, I know someone who said, I wanted to be a judge because of Tunku Maimun, right? So what kind of, I mean, that speaks volumes, because they wanted to be with someone they could trust, because she defended her judiciary, her judges, whenever it was necessary as well. So that speaks volumes, actually, for the kind of person that she is. So that it would look like that. It would have a proper appointments process. It would have judges who were deaf to what the executive says, deaf to the politics, and who do their jobs according to the law. I mean, of course, they are humans, you know, they may get it wrong, which is why we have an appellate system. Then, you know, it works. That's what it would look like. And I'll tell you how else it looks. When international communities, when the international legal communities say, wow, that's a very good system going on there in Malaysia. And they have said it. They have said it. With the judiciary under Tunku Maimun, they have said it. They knew about the 88 crisis. I'm talking about, I mean, you spoke to Stephen recently, from president of the Common Law Association. These lawyers hold her in the highest regard. There is a reason for that. So if you get international standing and recognition, that's good. And the third way you would see it is, third or fourth way, is when we get investments, because people trust our system. We will chase away investments, let me tell you, if our judiciary is undermined. And I think that is the one thing the government, surely at least that must matter. Okay, surely. Because it happened before. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing some of those insights. And also the quotes from the speeches were very heartfelt, and it was it encapsulated maybe how people viewed Chief Tengku Maimun's legacy. So thank you so much. That was Datuk Ambiga Sreenevasan wrapping up this episode of Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris signing off for the evening. Thank you so much for watching, and good night.